Welcome back to the Fluid Fan Podcast, your favorite podcast. I'm sure you're already subscribing. If you're not, please do so. I'm your host, Ruggiero, the I have 4 Olympic medals. I like to talk about that occasionally, but what I really talk about on this podcast is the Fluid Fan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Sports Innovation Lab, and our job is to really support the industry understanding fluid fan behaviors. We're fan experience, fan intelligence experts. That's what we nerd out about every day, and support our clients to really lean into those product experiences that are going to drive engagement and hopefully revenue. At the end of the day, this is a business. So this is a business podcast. We all need to rethink what it means to be a fan. As you know, fans are open to change, empowered to choose. They're always evolving. You can't just label them anymore. So we talk about the fluid fan on this every single day. They're behaving differently. And we really try to get underneath those fans' behavior with data, however you say it, but data. That's what the Fluid Fan Podcast is all about. And we are leaning hard into this space. So we talk about that. Today's guest is someone that knows fans from a variety of perspectives, not just the NCAA, but she's worked in the WNBA, the NBA. She's pretty much done it all. Val Ackerman, the current commissioner of the Big East, has joined me on this podcast, where we're not only going to talk about the Big East, but also something that is at the top of everyone's mind today, the name, image, likeness legislation that recently passed. She was absolutely vital in coming up with recommendations to the NCAA as the co-chair of the group that actually studied this for many, many years. She's going to share the ruling, give her perspective on what that means for student athletes and universities. Val's also a massive women's sports advocate, as the first commissioner of the WNBA. So we're going to hear all about what her perspective is on the NCAA, NIL, women's sports. She's got so many accolades, it would literally be the whole show if I had to cover it. But one I will highlight, Naismith Memorial Hall of Fame. She's going to be inducted around the corner. It's basketball's most prestigious group. So jam-packed episode today with one of the industry's absolute best, Val Ackerman, the commissioner of the Big East, on today's Fluid Fan Podcast. All right, welcome everyone again to the Fluid Fan Podcast. I'm here, as you heard, with the commissioner of the Big East, Val Ackerman. Val, welcome to the show.
Hey, Angela. Great to be with you, my friend. Always a pleasure.
You're amazing. I said before, this podcast could be hours. So I'm excited to dive right in. And part of it is you're just amazing. You've done so many cool, groundbreaking things. You continue to lead the way in the sports industry, won pretty much every award out there. Let me highlight a few for our listeners, though, that don't know you outside of your current commissioner role. SBJ's several awards at Sports Business Journal, Women's Sports Foundation, ESPN 40 for 40 honoree. Though I mentioned the WSF Billie Jean King Contribution Award, the Basketball Hall of Fame, the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame. You're going to be inducted momentarily in the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. Founding president, commissioner of the WNBA, president of USA Basketball. I know your work at FIBA, one of the only women on the FIBA board, and now obviously commissioner of the Big East. You've done everything. Okay, so I just want our listeners to remember and see, like, you've got such a baller, pun intended, background. How did you get here? Because there are a lot of people listen and are like, how can I be like Val Ackerman, myself included?
Well, Angela, one thing I've never had a chance to do is be an Olympian. So I'm going to just throw it right back at you and say what an inspiration you've been, not only, because of your playing career, stellar as it was, but all the continuing contributions that you're making to the sports world. So, you're really, raising the bar for all of us. And I just want to say thanks so much for everybody in our business for everything that you've done. And I know we'll continue to do. it's, as you know, it's a journey, right? Our lives are a journey. Some of what we do is planned. A lot of what we do is unplanned. So for me, I think that was maybe one theme. I didn't really, start out my career with a vision of like an ending place. It was mostly just, I really, like you, I was a former athlete and just wanted to stay in sports. Mm-hmm. And that was the dream. How can you sort of keep it going? Take those lessons from the playing field, that passion you have about, this world, the sports world, mm-hmm. and sort of turn that into your career and your life's work. And so that's, basically what happened to me starting out, when I started working at the NBA back in the late 80s, at a time when that league was small and growing under the commissionership of David Stern. And I just, opportunities just kind of came my way, men's basketball, women's basketball. And then sort of after I left the league in other areas of the sport. And now I've been in college sports in this role for about 8 years. And it's sort of full circle, I guess I'd say, because that's how it sort of began with my student athlete days back at the University of Virginia. So it's been a lot of fun. Best part is meeting great people like you. And we'll see, we'll see what the future holds.
Seems like you're enjoying the journey. Like you mentioned, University of Virginia, you were a little modest 4-year starter there, 3-time captain, and I will highlight 2-time academic All-American. You got your law degree at UCLA, and now you're you've worked on both the pro side and international, and kind of NGB Federation side, the politics, if you will, the NCAA side. So you've really, very few individuals I think have seen and worked in a variety of roles. But tell me then, again, my first question is really the WNBA, because you're working at the NBA under Commissioner Stern again. How did that happen? You were there when it started, and as we're celebrating our 25th, celebration here of the W, what was it like at the beginning? How did you do that?
Well, I'll give him a lot of the credit because it needed to be, I don't know if the word is green lighted or green lit. I'll go with green lit. It needed to be approved by somebody at the top. And that was David, who went to the NBA owners. To your point, really in the early to mid 90s, as we were tracking on the women's game, getting involved with the national team, USA basketball, women's team, which we started supporting before the Atlanta Olympics behind the scenes. And then, I would say David was the one that probably had the dream that someday there'd be a WNBA. And that was made to happen in the 90s, again, with Atlanta as an amazing launch pad because of the gold medal efforts there, not only in women's basketball, by the way, women's softball and women's soccer, as you'll recall, also brought home gold medals then. So it was the Olympics for women's team sports in a very significant way. And it really, was sort of this group effort at the NBA, this notion that women's pro basketball's time had come, that the NBA business was good, could support the endeavor. WNBA plays in the summertime still, 25 years later. And that was in part to deal, to sort of secure better television, to take advantage of NBA infrastructure, which was a little less, pressed in the summer months. And then, of course, to sort of give the NBA a year-round window in the game of basketball. And so all these sort of factors were coming together. Women's sports, I think women's basketball in particular, were starting to crest after, at that point, 20 years of Title IX. And so it was to answer your question, it was a very exciting time, very important initiative to be part of, a group effort of the highest order. Really, every senior executive at the NBA was involved in the launch of the league. And for me, it was the opportunity of a lifetime because it was the sport I played. And I'd been at the league at that point 8 years, so I knew all the people and I could sort of navigate. I like your use of the word political. A lot of these jobs, as you know, really do put a premium on those personal skills and relationships in order to get things done. And so, I think I was in a good position to be helpful because of my work already at the league office, but very exciting. And 25 years is a big deal. So A lot has happened since then. And, for the WNBA, it looks like all the arrows are continuing to point upward.
Yeah, we're a big believer, as you know, in the potential of women's sports from a pure business perspective. The Fan Project, which, launched last month, is all about that, unlocking that business potential. And all eyes are on the W and what it's doing and some of the recent moves it's made to, again, bring in Google and other partners that see that business potential. So thanks for starting that. I just want to start there. Thanks for kicking us off, because it's definitely one of the leagues that we point to a lot in terms of really laying the groundwork for this fan of women's sports.
No, Angela, and I'll just add to that note, when we started the league, we had to make some educated guesses about who the target audience would be. Mm-hmm. And because it was in the summer, we figured we could pick up basketball fans who were looking for a good game. Yep. When college basketball and the NBA was dark, if you will. But we were also hoping to tap into a new fan base with women who, we thought would want to see other women doing well, young kids, boys and girls, who we thought would drive the interest of their families. We expected to be there. Maybe some fans, who just had never really been fans of sports before, but saw in kind of women a different type of role model, a different kind of product. This cause marketing element, which I think has been at the WNBA's core since the beginning, maybe would appeal to some. And I think that's proven to be the case, particularly in recent year or two with the social justice movement that the league and other women's team sports have embraced. So I think your work is really topical, and I think there is some important lessons to learn from this 25-year experience of the WNBA, and hopefully what you're seeing can be sort of reinvested back into the effort so these fan bases can continue to grow.
Yep. Yeah, and intuitively, our data actually supported that the fans of women's sports are almost 50-50 men and women. I think that surprises some people, but people like seeing good sport regardless of gender. So that was one point you made, and this idea of, you said cause marketing. We see the fluid fan follows values. So in some cases, you win fans over by aligning to those fans' values, which the W has certainly done a great job of.
Well, I'll note again on the TV point, very interesting fact, in arena, we found, I don't know what the data is today, the WNBA base was largely female, like as much as 75 or 80%, but on television, the viewership was more male than female. So very interesting sort of comparison, perhaps, in terms of gender composition.
Yeah. That's why data is so important. You change your strategy if you know what's going on. So we love to nerd out all the time over. Let's talk about the Big East. And, you mentioned you've been there, 8 years now. Share some of your, monumental milestones within the Big East, because I obviously want to turn over to NIL shortly, given your very important role there. But I want to just start by laying the groundwork for your experience at the Big East and some of the recent deals maybe you've announced with Flow Sports and others, Fox, et cetera, to really think about your growth as a league.
Well, as you said, and I said, I've been here in this role for 8 years. The new Big East, I'll call it, kind of rose out of the ashes 8 or 9 years ago, following a period of pretty significant conference realignment, which is another way of saying schools moving from sort of one conference to another. That can be done. And certain leagues, you don't see much, if any, of that. Your old league, the Ivy League, has been the ancient 8 for many years, and I don't think will ever change. But pretty much every other conference in the country has seen some movement. And so the Big East was actually probably one of the harder hit conferences 10 years ago, with a number of schools leaving, mostly to go to the Atlantic Coast Conference. And principally because they were looking for greener pastures in the sport of football. So this league was 40 years, nearly 40 years old, with all of this sort of movement. And the group of schools that I now represent were basically sort of dealing with this existential threat of, look, if we don't do anything, we're going to be in a league where there's a lot of coming and going. There's a big focus on football. How could we sort of recapture our own destiny here? And for them, it was, how do we maintain our basketball heritage and many of the other values that were core to the founding of the Big East in '79 by one of my predecessors, a guy named Dave Gavitt, sort of very famous sports figure. And so they did that by essentially withdrawing from the old Big East, pulling in seven schools did that, pulled in 3 other schools from the Midwest to form what I refer to as the new Big East, which became a 10-team conference sponsoring 22 sports, football not being one of them, but men's and basketball being the lead sports, if you will. Setting up shop in New York City. The league had been headquartered for many years in Providence, Rhode Island. And importantly, being the beneficiaries of a long-term national television agreement with Fox Sports, which at the time, all these machinations were happening, was in the process of starting its own new national sports cable network, FS1. And that was due to launch in August of 2013. So Fox needed programming. And they saw in the new Big East and new Big East men's basketball in particular, valuable content for this new network they were about to launch. And so that was sort of the coming together of my schools looking to make a change, control their destiny, Fox needing programming, some other big decisions being made by my group in their ability to keep the name Big East, which meant a lot to them, to keep the history, the record books, and importantly, to keep the men's basketball tournament, which is really, my judgment, the best of its kind in college sports at Madison Square Garden, world's most famous arena. So this all was sort of unfolding. I was a bystander to that. But then when all these sort of pillars were sort of, put in place, they needed somebody to bring it to life. And that became me. So in July 1 was my start date of 2013. I took over the reins as the head of the new Big East. And here I am ever since. And to your point, it's been a really sort of unpredictable, exciting run. College sports is very dynamic right now, does a lot of good that I wish, it got more credit for. We were both, as you know, beneficiaries of college sports programs, got me my education. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't be here today. Yeah. I wasn't a student athlete back in the day at Virginia. It really sort of set me on my course. And, but yet there's, you alluded to some of the issues that we're dealing with now between coming out of COVID, which has affected all businesses, litigations that have affected operating decisions, name, image, and likeness, an important development for student athletes, the possibility, maybe some more alignment, particularly among the football schools, dealing with social and racial justice issues on campuses in the last year has been important and has forced a lot of conferences to reckon with who they are and what they stand for. And of course, gender equity, last but not least, is a hot topic, as I'm sure you know, with revelations this past spring about inequities at the NCAA women's basketball tournament that's led to a report that I think will bring a good new look at how women's college sports are managed, particularly at the national level. So there's just a whole lot going on now. You sort of get breathless thinking about it, but that's the world now. And, the good news, I think, for my league is we have a very together group. We have maintained our successes in basketball. We have very good academic performances by our student athletes, and we get involved in other initiatives, sort of, out of the classroom and off the playing fields as well that are important to our school. So there's a lot there. And, while we have some challenges, I think the benefits of college athletics to our country are very real and hopefully will be very longstanding.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, again, congrats on relocating to New York. You mentioned the Big East extension with MSG. I think that goes through 2028. You've launched the Big East Digital Network, which I know carries more than 200 live sports. You're doing a ton. That's on the business side, not to mention what you just mentioned, which is also why I really respect you. You really listen to the athlete, you're paying attention to the social injustices, the gender inequalities, trying to make college sports really a place that we can be student athletes, which I'm like you. I benefited immensely, not just from Title IX, but also from my university that gave me that opportunity to be both a student and an athlete. Which is why I'd love to hear more about, the NIL piece, because, we all have, you've been in the thick of this. You're literally the expert and everyone's got an opinion on it. But you understand business, and you also have a really deep understanding, I think, for those athletes and the opportunity of how the NCAA is evolving. And you have Olympic, background too, which again, I always think are fairly similar. Can you walk us through just what this is and is your role as one of the co-chairs that group, the NCAA federal and state legislation, brought you in to co-chair this NIL committee? How does that fit into this broader puzzle of evolving the NCAA student athletes and really allowing student athletes to flourish? Because I know you care about it. You've thought long and hard. I'm like on the seat, the front of my seat, to understand how we got to where we are and where we're headed.
Yeah, well, it's a important question, a long answer. I'll try to make it sort of as concise as I can for your viewers and listeners. I think that the general point I'd make, Angela, is that there has been, I think, not always well chronicled, but real progress for student athletes over the last 8 to 10 years, just in terms of increased benefits. Mm-hmm. In a variety of areas: educational, medical, scholarship protection, and of course that important scholarship support that you and I benefited from. I don't know that it worked that way in the Ivy League, but certainly for me, I got to go to school, on a full scholarship at Virginia and graduated debt free. And so for many athletes, that's the ultimate reward, getting a great education at a great school on someone else's dime. So that's been going on for a while, but sort of on top of all of that, there have been increasing benefits to student athletes that have been progressive over the last several years. So the latest iteration to your question is in the area of what's called name, image, and likeness, or NIL. Historically, the NCAA has rules which have prevented student athletes from monetizing their NIL opportunities. And sort of, I won't go into the history of all that. A lot of it predated me, but to your good description here, now 2+ years ago, the NCAA, in part because of actions that were being taken by state legislatures around the country who are looking to allow NIL opportunities to happen for athletes, irrespective of NCAA rules, there was sort of this decision to examine the existing NIL rules and recommend changes if warranted to that. Again, in part because of reactions to what was happening at the state level, a couple of cases, notably California. So I was appointed co-chair of a working group to examine these rules. The working group, we had 20 people involved. Gene Smith, the athletics director at Ohio State, was my co-chair. We had presidents, ADs, compliance folks, student athletes on our committee. After about a year of study, we concluded that the rules should in fact change. We should allow student athletes to be able to monetize their images for commercial gain, with the payments to be made by third parties. What we didn't want to see altered was the relationship between the school and the athlete, which is sort of scholarship, cost of attendance, other benefits. But we did think there was room to open up this area of third-party payments from everything from using their likenesses to promote business endeavors. Maybe they started their own business in their dorm room, wanted to use their name to promote the business. NCAA, by the way, had been quietly allowing that for years. So we said, well, let's just make that the rule instead of the exception or the waiver. And then sort of, going down the spectrum, the other side of it was allowing them to use their images for endorsement arrangements, including, importantly, in the social media area. where since I know you follow this closely, we were seeing a lot of activity by regular students who were, for example, becoming, prominent social influencers and
TikTok,
getting,
or an Instagram.
yeah,
Yeah.
and getting compensated for that, in some cases handsomely. And so the notion was, look, if a regular student can do that, why would we hold back a student athlete who has those same, gifts or attributes or appeal in the marketplace? And so that was, frankly, the pretty rapid decision our working group made. The reason we had to take a lot of time on it was because we were trying to figure out, well, how do we make that work in the college sports world, where first and foremost, you're dealing with recruiting. There are rules about cheating in recruiting. Questions were, how do we sort of keep those undue influences out of the recruiting landscape when you have the possibility of sort of payments that are coming in from a booster, which could be a way of disguising a payment for playing a sport. You have all these sort of complexities around that. So a lot of time spent on those issues. In the backdrop, of course, were litigations like the Austin case, which was, decided by the Supreme Court back in June, that did have a bearing on ultimately our decision to sort of not come out with a robust rules framework and instead to do a minimalist rules framework. So I guess the punchline here is that we now have NIL in the college space, effective July 1 this past year. So just a month and a half ago. It's very new. I think a lot remains to be seen about the kinds of deals that student athletes will be getting, the compensation for these deals, how much time it will take them to fulfill their responsibilities under these deals, and what that may require in terms of their time management vis-a-vis going to class, playing their sport, et cetera. The rules allow them to have advisors, which is critical because some of these are complex, as you know, so they're going to need help. A big question is, how far can a university go to help them? I mean, education is sort of one thing, and helping them build their brands is sort of okay too. But once you get past that into sort of brokering the deals or facilitating the deals, that starts to slide us into some of these inducement areas that we were concerned about at the beginning. So that's sort of playing itself out now, I think. And then last but not least, the thing I would mention to you is, one of the disadvantages right now is that there is not one single rule around it. And this is making it hard to manage in many ways because the NCAA, we came up with a framework in part because of litigation concerns that's very bare bones. It gives the schools in states that don't have a law a lot of discretion to come up with their own regulation. We have now many states which have begun to pass their own laws around it, and the laws aren't the same. So we have variances and effectively a patchwork of state laws. There was a hope that Congress would intervene before July 1 to come up with a national rule. It didn't. That didn't happen. And so without that, we have, again, kind of a mishmash of rules around the country on this very important topic, which we wanted to avoid, but weren't successful in doing that. Congress didn't act. The NCAA sort of backed off to make it less regulation. And so where that goes, I guess I'll end with this, remains to be seen. Are we going to have to deal with this patchwork where Massachusetts is different from New York, which is different from California, which is different from Arkansas? Or might we at some point have a policy where, a kid knows it's pretty much the same everywhere they're going to go? Yeah. And so that part's has made it very complicated.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of Rule 40 at the Olympic level, and basically the National Olympic Committees have their own. They can modify that rule, and we've seen that the same idea where athletes have more control now over their brand and maybe helping sponsors that aren't official sponsors, but this discrepancy from National Olympic Committee to National Olympic Committee, I'm curious, would it be good to have that minimum standard, if you will, or is it better in some ways that we're waiting, learning from all the examples that are coming out? Because there's a lot of action, as activity around this space, and whether it's athletes creating their social media platforms to grow their own brands or starting their own representation groups. I think an athlete from UConn trademarked her name and, is valued over $1 million. There's all this activity. Pro sports, I think the Florida Panthers I read they're getting in on the action. Everyone is dipping their toe in the water, but would you like to see a standardization is what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think that was very much the wish of our, the working group I co-chaired. And then there was a successor working group that was tasked with sort of getting into the nitty gritty on the rules.
Yep.
And I was on, that group for a year. In fact, that group we met last week, coincidentally, just to kind of touch base and exchange notes on how this was being managed at the campus level, because the campus personnel are really the ones now bearing the brunt, particularly if they're in a state that has a law. They've got to follow the state law. They've got to get very chummy with their, legislative, liaisons and so on. So the answer to your question is, I think this would be much easier if there was a single standard around issues like disclosures. Again, the level of institutional involvement, whether you should or could use institutional intellectual property or not, how to deal with conflicts. That's a big topic. I mean, right now, for example, athletic departments have deals, with sponsors. And the question that was raised many times over was, okay, well, what if the school has a big sponsorship arrangement with company X, which is basically funding every program in the department, but star athlete Y has a chance to make a deal with company Z, which is a competitor of company X. What does that mean? I mean, is that going to hurt the school to have the student athlete, the high profile student athlete with a deal with one of their competitors, even if it's without school marks? How's that going to affect the rest of the department if those funds sort of dip that were benefiting all? Sort of there isn't any, there's no standard, no standardization around that. And so that's, I think what we're seeing is just sort of that kind of playing itself out. Should we block certain categories altogether because they're at odds with NCAA values like gambling or banned substances? That for the most part is being left to the schools to just handle on their own. So there are a host of areas that I do think would be made simpler if there was just one rule that was understood by everybody. But that, again, that wasn't our fate on this. So now I think it's just a matter of just letting this play itself out over time, and then kind of seeing, okay, how do we manage the areas we sort of foresaw? And then other areas, may turn out to be, nothing burgers, so to speak. Yeah. And then there may be some things we hadn't thought about at all that emerge as things that we've got to sort of address in time. So I think it'll probably be a while, could be months, it could be a year, could be more before we really know how this, all turned out, so to speak.
Yeah. But you make a really good point that, again, taking a step back, it's definitely on paper better for the athletes and giving them more control over their brand and their followers. And I dealt with a lot of this, again, when I was chair of the IOC Athletes Commission, but to what extent does it pose the risk of blowing up the system, right? If if some of these bigger brands, are in direct conflict, as you pointed out, with it's Coke versus Pepsi, it's the Visa versus MasterCard, if whatever the competitor, how do we make sure that we can move forward? I always say the pie is bigger for everyone, but wedge the athletes in a way that doesn't blow up the system. And I don't know what your take is from then the Big East moving forward, how you're approaching sponsorship and media rights in any different way based on NIL?
Well, the answer to your question is, one, again, it remains to be seen, like what it does to the system. Again, I think student athletes, certainly my personal view and the view of our original working group was that student athletes are entitled to these rights. And this was part of, again, this progressive expansion of opportunities that we've been seeing in other areas. So I think that, that's sort of, like a fundamental principle here is that it had to happen and it should have happened and did happen. So that's one. In terms of how it affects sort of revenue streams that have historically flowed to the schools, I think it does remain to be seen. I mean, we'll see what happens with sponsor revenue. Maybe the pie will grow. Maybe a sponsor will have to choose. Okay. I'm not going to spend any more money. So it used to be the school got all the money. Now I'm going to spend part of that money on a student athlete. School's going to get less. What does that mean for the school? We don't know. Will the school be able to make up for that in some other way? Remains to be seen. Another important area that we'll see if it's impacted is philanthropy. I mean, universities, the lifeblood, many athletic departments are the donations from the big donors who are paying for, buildings, facilities, capital projects, making, big gifts that support scholarships, coaches' compensation, a whole host of other critically important areas to the operation of the department. And so will they be, directing some of their money to student athletes? Because that part, that's permissible if it's sort of not inducement, if it's not an inducement. Will they be turned off because a student athlete is making a lot of money? They thought they were supporting a student, not something else. Well, maybe not. We don't know. So that, that piece clearly remains to be, to be seen as well. In terms of, how it will impact other areas of the business right now, I think the sort of bright line for schools is at this point not wanting to see so-called pay for play, not wanting to see payment for athletic performance. The NIL payments are deemed to be compensation for something different than athletics performance. But, I think that is probably the question, for college sports is at what point can this, this collegiate model be sustained long-term? I mean, is it going to turn into something else over time, particularly for the sports that generate the most money, and that's football and men's basketball. The other sports aren't in that camp, but football and men's basketball are the ones that attract the most attention on this sort of pay for play debate. Mm-hmm. And so I don't have the crystal ball to say whether, that's going to happen at some point just because of, something organic happening or because of a court decision or because of what Congress may or may not do. I think, to your point, that's really the question, but I hope the essence of college sports, which is, students competing against students, combining education with athletics, using this as part of, life training, having a way to engage alumni in an important way, bringing, campus communities together in this sort of good, wholesome, exciting school spirit kind of way. I mean, that's what college sports is really all about. Yep. And hopefully that essence, will sort of carry through no matter what happens in terms of the relationship between the student athletes and their universities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like, you've been wrestling this issue for years, but the idea of keeping the NCAA that special place that you use sport to learn, you develop human beings on the court, and all the reasons that you just pointed out, like how do we continue to evolve this ecosystem, but protect the essence, protect the kind of values that I benefited from. I certainly learned a ton through my athletic experience that now I take into the workforce and the real world, so to speak. So, well, we'll be paying attention, Val. I just want to say thank you. I know you've been thinking about this, and on behalf of the whole ecosystem, thanks for the hard work that you've done here. I want to turn it over. Just a quick question. First, again, congratulations on the Hall of Fame. That's amazing. I think there's like 22 other women. It's just the most prestigious hall in your world, in the basketball world. So congratulations there. And you're a Hall of Famer. What do you think of 3-on-3 basketball that debuted in Tokyo? Just for a fun question, because Anyway, what's your thinking on this cutting edge new way? I mean, 3-on-3 has been around for a while, but the fact that it's an Olympic event now, what's your take on how they performed at the games?
Well, you mentioned earlier my work with FIBA, the International Basketball Federation, and I was actually on their board as this question of adding 3-on-3 to the Olympic program was being debated. And I will credit, you know him well, Patrick Baumann, the former Secretary General of FIBA, who was a member of the IOC and worked with you, I know. Yep. He was the guy. He was the one that really pushed to get 3-on-3 into the Olympics. And it didn't happen right away. It took a while to be, to be sort of adopted. And then Tokyo, of course, was the debut here. But I got to give Patrick credit on this one. I mean, he really did see this as an exciting new discipline for the sport, a way to get other countries engaged in the sport in a different way, a way to get other countries really good at a type of basketball in a way that might not have been possible as quickly with 5-on-5, because you don't need as many players. The 3-on-3 team's only 4 players. And it's sort of a different feel. It's a half court game. It's sort of continuous motion. I went to 3-on-3. You and I were together at the Youth Olympic Games a couple of years ago in Argentina. And I went to the 3-on-3 competition there, and it was great. It's music, and it was outdoors and a big tent, a lot of, happy people in the stands watching it. So it really, it was a different vibe than sort of indoor 5-on-5. And so, I think FIBA, to their credit, was really onto something here by trying to blow this out. And, it was great to see, of course, the USA women win the gold medal. But just to give you a sense of how this is sort of lifting the rest of the world, the USA men didn't even qualify for 3-on-3 in Tokyo. They didn't even qualify. They didn't make the cut. So it just shows you the rest of the world sort of has figured out this brand of basketball. And that's very exciting for different reasons, to get them.
It's funny. We did sit together. I remember going to the first Youth Olympics when they debuted in Singapore in 2010. I was like, what is this? There's dancers and music, and it's quick, and anyone could win. And it again, we talk a lot about this fluid fan on this podcast, and how sometimes it's just innovating the format, making it shorter, more bite-sized. Maybe it's the music. I mean, 3-on-3 to me hits everything. It's like very, it's super engaging. And so kudos, congratulations for being on the board that approved it. Cause I had even from home, watching from home, it was one of those sports that I think we're all tracking closely. So in wrapping up, I can't let you go. I mean, you're gonna talk about innovation with me in a second, but gender equality, because that's such a big part of who you are. One, you just led the way. If you can see it, you can be it. You've been the person that a lot of us could see, the only woman in the room countless times, leading the way, but not, you want others with you. You're always quick to say, I want other women around the table with me. Tell me, how do we get there? Because I know you care passionately about it. I know it's a lot to summarize here, but you have done so much advocacy both on the court and off the court. And a lot of people, men and women, are leaning in. I really sense a different change in society. How do we get there quicker in sport?
Well, I'm going to start this answer, Angela. You and I've been talking about this for years. I'm going to start the answer by saying, I think the glass is fuller and, we want more. We always will, it's not 50-50. So until it is, we're always going to push. But I look back to when I started in the sports business, which was now 33 years ago, and it is better. I mean, just the number of women who are obviously playing sports. And we saw that in Tokyo. I don't know what the percentage was. I think Team USA,
it was almost 50%. Women won on the US at least over 60% of the medals. But in terms of participation, it was almost equal.
Okay, so that's a big step, as you know. Yeah. That took years. So that's good. The leader piece, and now we've got pro leagues, WNBA, the NWSL. Hopefully we're going to have a WNHL someday. We're going to
talking for a while there.
We're going to hope, we'll see. We know other women's team sports, especially, are growing. Women's tennis continues to be this beacon, my judgment. And so, we're sort of, and women's college sports are a force. So the participation's good. The leader piece is what I think you're asking about. Yep. And it is better. I mean, I'm not always the only woman in the room like I used to be. So there are more women in college sports. There are a third of the D1 commissioners are female. We need more women ADs. And so that's a work in progress. to see, women like you who are, innovative and aggressively pushing the agenda to get more women connected to each other and to use that as a way to inspire and inform, exchange notes. Hey, how did you figure this out, et cetera, is critically important to that progress that, we've talked about. I think as more women graduate from sports as players like you and I did, and then want to stick around, they will bring with them those experiences and life skills, to the endeavors. And I think that's helped. Having that connection between playing, transitioning, leading is important. Many sports management programs now talk about the importance of diversity and getting more people at the table. At the end of the day, we still need the people in charge, who are largely men, to make decisions that open doors and get more women at the table, to position them for these leader positions when they become available, to get them the mentoring they need so they, do well. I mean, that was my experience. I mean, I worked for men. I didn't have women to look up to when I was coming up in the NBA. My bosses were guys, their wives didn't work. And there I was, and they were, basically pretty good to me and made my career possible. And so I think, to your point, I think for those of us who are now where we are, you, me, others, many others, we now have to just kind of do our job and bring along with us, the women who are going to follow. We're not going to be in these jobs forever. And so every touch point, I call it the power of one. Every touch point we have to talk to a young woman, give them some advice. Here's how I did it. Talk to this person, read Sports Business Journal, go to Sports Innovation Lab, get some more information there, whatever we can do to redirect them so they are armed, not with just the knowledge, but with the skills, the people skills, the political, you got to sometimes do this to, kind of find your way. And then importantly, inspire them, because some days are hard. I'll leave it at that. I mean, I've had hard days in my career, especially bringing up kids in this business, feeling left out of things at times, wondering how I'm not getting paid as much as this person who started after me. That happened to me once in my career. That was a fun conversation with my boss. He didn't dispute it, by the way. I quickly got a raise, but sometimes you gotta like stand up for yourself.
Yeah.
And, progress, I'm optimistic. I'm going to stay optimistic. I think we're going to move forward.
Yeah. Well, thank you. For what you've done in so many parts of your career, for men, for women, for just the sports industry in general. You've been a pioneer in so many ways. I'm psyched you're in the Hall of Fame. I'm going to call you a badass, even though I don't know if I'm supposed to call commissioners badasses. You get that label from me, because you are.
Okay. Can I call you that too?
Keep doing what you're doing.
All right.
No, this is about you. You are awesome. So keep doing what you're doing. I know NIL will continue to evolve, but you, once again, set the foundation for where we're headed in that space. With that, I need to ask you about innovation, because you've lived it. You're pushing the boundaries within the Big East and everything you do. So this segment is all about innovation. What does it mean to you? What does innovation mean to you?
Well, I think it's trying to keep up with the times. I mean, at the most basic level. I mean, not having your head in the sand about trends, about what's going on in the bigger world. And for me, some of it is just as basic as keeping up with the news. I mean, I think all of us in our business, as you know, have to spend at least a portion of our day reading the newsletters, reading outside publications, so that we know what's going on in, globally with technology, in the pro leagues, if you're in the college world, in the college world, if you're in the pro world, trying to keep up with things that are happening elsewhere. I mean, that's how because I think when you're in a leader position, it's your job to connect dots.
Yeah.
And just be intellectually curious and know a little bit about a lot of things. And so, I mean, I saw that with David Stern. I mean, he would like rip articles out of newspapers back then, or magazines. And like, he had a stack in his office, and like the stack, he never threw anything out. So like the stack was like 3 feet high because these were things that were interesting to him. And it was his way of connecting dots to know these things. So I think for me, innovation is that it's keeping current and trying to anyway, because we're all on information overload. So that's one. Two, I think for me, it's David had this thing about not wanting the NBA to be just a sports league. So I've carried that over to my work. I mean, there's core things that a sports league has to do. You got to get games played and officials assigned and people to keep score and all that. But, we all know sports leagues can be so much more because of the influence they have and the role model appeal of their athletes and the resources they can bring to pretty much anything because of the revenue basis they have. So college sports, we're not the pros, but I think we can be more than just college conferences. And I think we have to be because we're in the education business. So for me, it's sort of this mindset of being more than just a college conference. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? How can we knit together the values of our schools to do more, be of more service to them, et cetera, distinguish ourselves? So, I think about that. And then, last but not least, I think in this day and age, you can't think innovation without thinking about the impact of technology on all of our lives. And that's where I laud you and your group, because you guys have stayed at the forefront of helping, all of us understand, like, here's what's happening. This was yesterday's news. Here's what's going to happen tomorrow. Being able to have people in our business who can like look around the corners and see what's coming and, help the people in decision-making positions to make the bet about, okay, what do I do? What do I invest in? How am I going to reach my fans of tomorrow? How do I deal in the college space with sort of 70-year-old fans and 20-year-old students? How do you sort of thread needles here? How do you deal with, resource allocation, and what's effective and efficient and all that? So, I think on that score, I do think about it. I'm not by nature a techie, need to be more of one, but I know enough to pay attention. And so we have, tried in the college world. We're a little slower to move than the pros, but I think if you're not paying attention, you're behind this day and age. So, again, those are the kinds of things that come to mind.
It's honestly, it's why I started this company, that leaders like yourself are so busy connecting the dots and they have so much on your plate to be having that stack of paper. We have natural language processing on our back end that can process volumes and scores and press releases and earnings reports, and obviously use technology to help us make the right recommendations, what's around the corner, so that you don't have to worry. You still have to worry, but I'm trying to make people's lives easier that want to lean into innovation like yourself and stay on top of what's around the corner. So my next question, you may have already answered because I've heard his name a few times, but most innovative person, and you can say living or deceased, because I think you can say both. I keep hearing David Stearns. Maybe he's your guy. He learned a lot from him. But is there someone that you really look up to today or yesterday that you'd point towards?
Well, I'll give a name. I'm just going to use Steve Jobs. I mean, I read his bio. It was one of the most interesting books I've ever read. I believe Walter Isaacson wrote it. It was just an incredible primer on, he was incredible. I'm looking at this thing going, how did this happen? I'm walking around with a computer in my hand, looking stuff up all the time. Taking pictures and sending them to, friends halfway around the world. The ability of one person to sort of conceptualize all that, of course, hand it to Apple to keep innovating and iterating these devices. Got my iPad. I'm sitting here talking to you on my MacBook. It's just incredible how our lives have been inexorably sort of altered because of, the genius there. So I'm going to just use that one. I'll just, and the bio I recommend because as a leadership primer, it was really instructive. It was sort of, it's not just what he did, amazingly well. It was what he didn't do so well. It was sort of where he kind of fell short as a manager, how he dealt with his staff, his idiosyncrasies. You kind of read it and go, okay, that's what I don't do when I'm dealing with my workforce, I'm going to do it the opposite way. So that one, I would just recommend anybody to just sort of follow up on his life story. It's an amazing story.
Would you then say Apple's the most innovative company in our space?
I'm going to say yes.
Yeah.
They're going to get my vote.
Yeah. And their stock is sort of mirrored that appreciation in the market. They're pretty good. All right, wrap it up. What's the most innovative league, team, or federation on the property side? Besides the Big East, who do you look up to?
Well, I'll remain and admire my old workplace, the NBA. I mean, David obviously got it going. Adam Silver's kept it going. They seem to be everywhere that they should be. So whether it's globally in technology, fan engagement, innovative activations with brands, diversity, the importance of that, et cetera. I guess I'd put, and I'm proud, being a basketball person, to see the basketball business kind of leading the way. Rick Welts is a dear friend of mine, just retired as the president of the Golden State Warriors. And so I know, he did great work while there, particularly on the facilities front. And as you know, because your firm has expertise here, that's been very interesting to see these sort of, new age palaces emerging, with fans who go to a building and are looking at a very different experience than the one we used to have when we went, 10 years ago, 25 years ago. I mean, COVID has fueled some of it. Mm-hmm. But the way that, fans want to appreciate a sporting event has certainly changed. It's generational in some respects. And, I can't wait to make my next trip to San Francisco to see that new building. So what we've been seeing there, and I know my friend Rick has led the way in terms of that area, have been two things that have stood out to me: the NBA and the Warriors.
Well, definitely both of those organizations get high marks in our reports, and we hear them a lot. So definitely you're in good company there, and you're biased, but your bias is warranted in this case. Val, thank you again, Commissioner of the Big East, for everything you do. Continue to I wish you all the best, especially as COVID is, something I'm sure you're staying on top of with your student athletes and all the interesting work you're doing. Thank you for being a part of our Women's Leadership Board. Thank you for good luck in your Hall of Fame speech, writing it, because that's always a lot to try to cram a life's work into, what do they give you, 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
Something like that. Yeah, it's not a lot.
But thanks for being on the Fluid Fan podcast. Really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Ann. And thanks for all you're doing. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Once again, I want to thank my good friend, Val Ackerman. You're the best. Thanks for joining me on the show today. You've been at the forefront of NIL legislation and have absolutely been leading the way for the Big East with goals of not only the university, but also the student athletes as well. So thanks for all you do in the NCAA with your positions at almost every single level of basketball. And for, again, what you do to be a better leader, better person, better role model, a great role model for young women, young men as well. And just, again, you're pushing. I appreciate you pushing and leading the way. So thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today. I want to thank my producer, Jack Barlow, as well as my entire team, Sports Innovation Lab. We've got a great team. If you work with us, you'll know. So pick up the phone. Let me know how we can be supportive of you if you're an executive in the space. Our job every single day, again, is to support the best fan experience. We are fan intelligence experts, market research experts. All we think about is a fluid fan and how to build the right technologies to really appease and lean into those fluid fan behaviors that we talk about every single day here on this podcast and with my team. It's fun work. I love what I do, but I love my team and I love my listeners. Thanks for your time today. Feel free to subscribe to this podcast. Send us a note on Twitter or LinkedIn at Sports iLab, my personal channel at Angela Ruggiero. Really excited again to share this episode of the Fluid Fan podcast. Until next time, I'm Angela Ruggiero. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.